What is up, everyone? I'm Jared Harris, and this is episode 4 of Beats by Jer. While the previous 3 episodes have focused on new music from 2022 and some of the significance behind it, today we are going to turn our attention to 2023. That's right, we are back to the future, or the present, or whatever Christopher Lloyd was going on about in those movies. Today, we will be looking at some of the coolest releases, albums you've probably heard of, some that you may have missed, some that you may not have heard of at all. Some of the coolest releases that have come out in 2023. In chronological order, here are 10 albums that will leave you better off having heard from 2023. Starting the year off strong on January 6th, not even 1 week into 2023, came Every Loser by Iggy Pop. This is a cool record for a number of reasons. For starters, Post-Pop Depression, released just a couple years ago, was supposedly Pop's final rock record. There's a weight to it that felt that this was just one last ride, one last job, one last score. It was a collaborative album with Josh Homme. It was packed with attitude, slinky riffs. It was one of Pop's best, and there was just a vibe to it. It felt a weight of finality to it. And yet, Pop is back with Every Loser. The record is super nostalgic for his early 70s solo records, The Idiot and Lust for Life, both of which he worked with extensively with David Bowie while they were living together in Berlin. Every Loser is backed by an incredibly stacked band, mainly consisting of Guns N' Roses bassist Duff McKagan and Red Hot Chili Peppers drummer Chad Smith, alongside all-star producer and guitarist Andrew Watt. The album also features performances from Travis Barker, a mini Jane's Addiction reunion between Dave Navarro, Eric Avery, and Chris Chaney, Stone Gossard from Pearl Jam, and perhaps one of the final performances from Taylor Hawkins. It's important to note Watt's involvement in this project is something to take note of. He is one of the hottest rock producers out there right now. He himself has had an underrated solo career, which is just under his last name, Watt. There's a 2015 EP, Ghost in My Head, that is super cool. However, he found far more success as a producer working with the likes of Cardi B and some of the biggest pop artists of our time. However, he has a gift for making really awesome rock records. He's made a pair of records with Ozzy Osbourne, and he made Earthling with Eddie Vedder just last year. And it seems whoever he sets his sight on, people want to work with him, and he creates these very collaborative records with an abundance of really cool and meaningful guest appearances, and Every Loser is no different from that. The album rules, especially the heavier songs that almost bridge the gap between the Stooges and the first 2 Pop records. For me, Every Loser was just a great way to kind of add to Pop's extensive discography. Key songs are Frenzy, Strung Out Johnny, Modern Day Ripoff, Neo-Punk, and The Regency, all of which have that late Stooges vibe, early pop solo record. It's almost, despite being a later career hit, it's almost a bridge between those 2 crucial periods early on in Pop's career. Would absolutely recommend Every Loser. Following just a few weeks later comes July Talk's 4th studio album, Remember Never Before. For me, this was the album that finally made July Talk make sense. The synthesis between Peter and Leia's voice, their use of modern alternative rock sounds mixed with traditional blues rock riffs. The synthesis of everything that they've been trying to achieve feels like it's reached this culminating point on Remember Never Before. And I went from appreciating the band as, the Toronto band that made it, to suddenly this is a really, really thrilling band to listen to. And it really feels like they finally found a means of capturing their sound. The opening song after this sounds like it could be the soundtrack to a heist, with the getaway driver anxiously waiting for the Motley Crue to rush into the van. There's such an intensity boiling in this song. Certain Father carries Bowie vibes, while I Am Water has just this sort of funkiness to it without being funk. There's a lot on this record that's really, really cool. There's a lot to celebrate, and whatever direction July Talk takes from this point is sure to be spectacular. I actually saw the band perform at Massey Hall shortly after they had put out this album, and it was such a thrilling performance. The energy was unparalleled. The sense of controlled chaos was so abundant and tangible, and the band was just so incredibly tight. And as I learned recently, they do all of this without performing to a click, without tracks, anything. It's all 100% live, and it made for such an exciting show. If you are a fan of July Talk, please stay tuned for next week's episode. We have a very, very special treat for you. Next comes Fearless, the latest album, again from local Toronto-ish based band that has made it big, Crownlands. This was a stunning progressive rock album in the most classic sense of the word. Think of Rush from the early 70s, and you have what Crownlands has been achieving on this album. I don't listen to a lot of progressive rock or metal, especially modern bands that are within that genre. I find the genre as a whole prioritizes flashy musicianship and technical pieces over just building songs that resonate beyond the technique. Maybe I've just never gotten it, but it's never really been my thing. However, Crownlands has never felt that way. Having been a fan of them for years now, and having seen them develop from like a riff rock band into this like progressive odyssey, everything on Fearless feels like a necessary step. There is nothing that feels like it's left to chance. There is nothing that feels like it is included for any other reason other than serving the song. And the results are stunning. The opening track, Starlifter, Fearless Part 2 in particular, is a 18-minute journey, and not a second feels wasted. Of course, the climax of the album comes through Lady of the Lake, which is just a truly incredible classic rock song. And it's from 2023. It's not from Led Zeppelin in 1973. But it has those vibes. It's got those Zeppelin 4 vibes captured by a young band doing it now. It's a fantastic 70s album without feeling dated or without feeling like it's running through the cliches of trying to sound like a 70s album. It feels entirely authentic, entirely necessary, and entirely true to what Crownlands is about. The next record is from yet another local project, Vicious Beast, and their Salvador Dali inspired album title, I Am Drugs. This is led by Monster Truck singer, songwriter, bassist John Harvey, and also features a good friend of mine, Mike Penny of the Jailbirds, on guitar. It's a super cool project. If you're into Monster Truck, you should love Vicious Beast. It's very much in that vein, only it's a little grittier, a little grungier. The songs carry a lot more of a sinister tone to it. It's a very dark and moody record compared to, I don't want to say polished, but the cleaner, more polished tone of a Monster Truck record. It feels a little more DIY, a little more risky, a little more dangerous in that sense. Not to mention, Harvey's vocals on I Am the Night and Sleepwalker are exceptional. One of the most powerful voices in modern rock. And Vicious Beast is just a really cool project that he's been cooking up as of late. On April 24th, Pearl Jam released Give Way. This was a very unique record for a few reasons. Firstly, it was a record store day release. And it was released in celebration of the 25th anniversary of their fifth studio album, Yield. Give Way was recorded in 1998 as the band was on their final couple of shows in Australia. These shows in itself are important for a number of reasons, mainly because these were the final performances to feature drummer Jack Irons, formerly of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, in the band before Matt Cameron became their permanent drummer since then. Matt Cameron, of course, being from Soundgarden. What's most interesting about this record is that this is almost the perfect peek behind the curtain at Pearl Jam at a very unique time in the band's career. At this point, 1998 it really is a transitional period, and this is in some ways the last look at Pearl Jam, the grunge band, before they transition to a more sustainable version of themselves, where they transition into more of a modern rock band, the Pearl Jam we have today. That's no slight to them at all. I absolutely love Pearl Jam, all shapes and forms that they've come in over the last couple decades. However, Give Way is possibly the last time that the band truly had teeth to their live performances. There's really a sense of danger. You can hear it in Eddie Vedder's voice. You can hear it in the way Irons attacks the drums and the way the band responds to him. It's a tough decision to look at who is the best drummer Pearl Jam has ever had. Of course, Dave Abruzzi's had such a unique feel to him. Jack Irons captured such a raw energy, and Matt Cameron is the most technical of the three. It really is a challenging conversation. But looking at the set list from this live album opening with Release, first of all, only Pearl Jam as in the rock context. No other band could open with such a stirring ballad before going into an all-out punk rocker, Brain of J. But you've got Animal, In My Tree, Corduroy, Even Flow, Spin the Black Circle, Hail Hail, State of Love and Trust, a personal favorite of mine, Alive, Black, and ending with Immortality. This album captures all sides of Pearl Jam, and it does so in such an explosive and combustible way. It really is an incredible display of Pearl Jam at such a time. And I find transitional albums such an interesting piece because you can kind of see where the band is going with their new material. Yield was, after all, their fifth album. And, by the time Vitology comes around, they're kind of looking for the exit out of grunge, as most bands were, right? The quote unquote grunge scene, all of these bands that we think of when we associate with grunge are so entirely different from one another, but and they all kind of transition in and out of the genre as the 90s kind of fade away. Pearl Jam was no different. Vitology really is their last grunge album before they start looking for a new sound. And it leads to a period of some really experimental records. And I think Give Way is just a really interesting display of the band who is, in the midst of finding a new sound while still performing the way that they were known for at the time. Of course, transitioning to something more sustainable is very important. We have Pearl Jam for over 3 decades now, and likely that transition is what has kept the band going. And, they've made some incredible music since. But you would be remiss if you passed up on the treasure that is Giveaway. I think I captured it best when I reviewed the album for the Spill magazine. Before the unmatched precision of Matt Cameron and the polish of Boom Gasper and more recently Josh Klinghoffer, Pearl Jam shined bright as a fiery rock outfit with an enriched and soulful sense of balladry, something unparalleled by even their greatest of peers. In this regard, Give Way captures a fleeting era where Pearl Jam was still dangerous, before it made a transition into something more refined and sustainable. While there is nothing wrong with where they are now, Pearl Jam never fails to elicit a sense of excitement. There is certainly something to be cherished about the sound and energy presented on Give Way. In May, alternative rock originators, icons, instigators, innovators, Fishbone from Los Angeles released their self-titled EP, their first collection of new recorded material in almost a decade. Fishbone is a 5-track record. It shines bright for showcasing the band and their just ability to blur the lines between genres. It's so hard to categorize Fishbone, and you never know what you're going to get from the band. There's ska, there's punk, there's alternative rock, there's borderline metal on this record. There's tons of stuff all in here. That being said, we want to focus on the center of the album, Estranged Fruit. Now, this is not a cover of Billie Holiday's 1939 song, Strange Fruit. This really isn't a cover, but it also is. Fishbone twists the lyrics, the melody, the harmonic progression. They're really pulling from the original, but also changing it. And it's so interesting because almost a century later, this song written by Abel Meeropol, and of course recorded by Billie Holiday, this song about lynchings and seeing black bodies hung from trees, this truly harrowing song, to see a modern remake of it done from the perspective of people of color and seeing that while progress has certainly been made, not enough has. It's a really striking song, and Fishbone collaborated with NoFX to just deliver this musical potluck of so much. There's so much going on in this song. It feels like New Orleans ragtime. There's elements of jazz and like sleazy blues before erupting into this explosive punk rock coda. And the song is just, musically it's absolutely brilliant, but from a social, political, and cultural point of view, to hear Angelo Moore use a sort of twisted crooner tone talking about estranged fruit and playing off of this very familiar melody is so powerful. It's so heartbreaking. It's so poignant. It's such a incredible choice, and musically Fishbone did it in a way that no one else could have. Next up is Dark Fighter from Rival Sons. This is the first of 2 records that they have planned for 2023, and without a doubt is among the greatest rock records to come out this year. Rival Sons, of course, being one of the most exciting up-and-coming rock bands to have really emerged in the last decade. They've done is seemingly the greatest challenge, in that they're a very 70s inspired band, but they, similar to what I was saying about Crownlands, they avoid the pitfalls of sounding like they're rehashing the 70s. They sound entirely modern. They sound entirely unique, yet that 70s sound runs so thick through their veins. Mirrors, for example, is a fantastic song. It opens the record, and the chemistry between the guitar and the drums is so reminiscent of Page and Bonham. Just the way the riff leaves these little pockets of space, and the drums just effortlessly kind of fit perfectly in the space around that of the riff. Nobody Wants to Die, another fantastic rocker. Guillotine is jaw-dropping. It is everything that the band is doing, the soft to loud dynamics, the building of organic songwriting with each verse and each chorus bigger than the last. It is absolutely phenomenal. But the ballads on this record too, right? Like Rapture and Dark Side, Horse Breath, right? These are all fantastic songs. And the record as a whole is just such a refreshing take on classic and modern rock. I had the pleasure of interviewing Scott Holiday, the guitarist from the band, for the Spill magazine earlier this year, and he spoke about a lot of how Rival Sons is not a political band. He just wants to create, the band just wants to create music that is a welcome space, that you can kind of reflect on the divisions between different groups, different parties, and just kind of come together and enjoy music. And he speaks with a level of kindness, with a level of compassion that is often lacking. And specifically Dark Fighter, and I believe the next record is called Light Bringer, and the band is looking at a fall release for that. The album kind of looks at these divisions and thematically explores the idea of how society is so fractured nowadays, without it feeling like a necessarily political album. Holiday very thoughtfully stated, "I think art should be, to a certain degree, a mirror to society, to people, and to culture. You want to see current reality in all forms of art, not just music, but writing and art. You want to feel some sort of connection to your own experience in this life. We are not a very political band on purpose. I would like to create a place where we can all come together. Music and art is the great joiner, the universal language. The records are about the human condition, about struggle, hope, and love." Next up on this list is the big one. I'm calling it now Album of the Year. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you've also already listened to this album. I'm talking about Queens of the Stone Age, In Times New Roman. This album is incredible. There's not a single weak song on it. At its worst, it's just good. But at its best, it's some of the strongest material to come from Josh Homme and company. The album itself it feels like a culmination of the last two records, like Clockwork and Villains. It feels very much in the vein of those two albums. However, it also feels less polished, less refined. It feels nostalgic for Lullabies to Paralyze. It's such a cool record. A lot of it sounds intentionally claustrophobic, a bit more chaotic and wild than the previous two albums. The last two records featured a very, not necessarily controlled sound to them, but it was a very precise sound, right? The drums played very precise, very exact fills at very select moments, right? Lead guitar lines also kind of felt very much constricted to these particular moments, and the result was a very sleek sound on these albums. And there's a little bit of throwing caution to the wind with like Clockwork. The drums, John Theodore is finally playing a lot more technical fills and much more abundance. John Theodore is so underused in this band. He does such a fantastic job, but if you listen to him and what he's capable of with like the Mars Volta, it's so cool to hear him bringing some of those offbeat rhythms into his fills and playing with the measures, not to the same degree, of course, but in a much more technical manner than he has on the previous two Queens records. But even the bass, the guitars, the synths, everything has much more almost freedom in their approach to lead lines and fills and just playing out. And it makes for a very tight sonic feel. There's so much musical data coming at you from this album, and it's done intentionally so. Of course, this follows such a very traumatic period for Hami. He's talked about this a lot. His conversation with Zane Lowe was a very eye-opening podcast, and it was a really enjoyable listen. But the build up to this record was preceded by a very messy divorce and an even messier custody battle for his kids. If you listen to his conversation with Neil Brennan on the Blocks podcast, he talks about getting clean from some really intense drugs. And of course, there was the passing of some of his very close friends, including Anthony Bourdain and Mark Lanegan, who was also a member of Queens of the Stone Age for some time in the early 2000s. The record is very dark. It's still this sort of alternative rock sound, something that you can bob your head to, something you could dance to. But it's really thematically heavy. It's really dark in tone. It's almost, brutal. It's vicious, and it's attack. It's a fantastic record in the way that it's kind of merged two conflicting moods through music and overall tone that kind of hangs over the record. The opening track, Obscenary, is jaw-dropping. It's like the most claustrophobic on the record, and to me, hearing that song for the first time, it was, the return of Queens of the Stone Age as the leaders and pioneers of modern alternative rock. It was unlike anything they've done in the past, unlike anyone else has done ever, and I don't think someone could come around and make a song like that. Paper Machete is also a fantastic one. I really enjoyed Negative Space, which they just, as I'm recording this, they just hours ago released a music video for. Made to Parade has a really cool swagger to it, and Carnivore's got a really sort of sparse, eerie vibe about it. Sicily is a trip. That song feels like Josh Homme's audition to write a James Bond song, only it's James Bond going through some sort of Alice in Wonderland hellhole. It's James Bond meets Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. It's that instrumental hook in the chorus is so perfect. It's so sinister. It's oozing with both charisma and evil, and that song is, I don't know how to say it other than they turned a whole lot of nothing into something that is borderline genius. It's an absolutely captivating song. And of course the album closes with the traditional Josh Homme desert sound, the sound he brings to all of his work in a blues context, straight jacket fitting. And again, just the fact that this song is 9 minutes in length, and he's made a compelling blues song that's 9 minutes and just slowly builds upon the riffs and the motifs established within the opening of the song. It's just, it's refined songwriting done so in such a exciting way. There are just so many true moments of greatness on Like Times New Roman that are simply unlike anything else out there from Queens of the Stone Age, from anyone else. It's front to back. It is without a doubt my favorite album released this year. Released on the exact same day, June 16th, comes Michael from Killer Mike. And I will say it now, without sounding like a broken record, This is the rap record of the year, without a doubt. Killer Mike is so overlooked, he's so overshadowed, but he is so incredibly prolific. On To Pimp a Butterfly, Kendrick Lamar rapped that if you missed when hip hop was about rapping, then Killer Mike should be platinum. I'm paraphrasing, of course. And hearing that back when To Pimp a Butterfly first came out made me go, okay, who is Killer Mike? I've never heard of this rapper. And, if he's on Kendrick's radar saying, if Kendrick is saying that this man should be a platinum selling artist, this man should be a platinum selling artist. And that led me down the Run the Jewels rabbit hole. And since then, Run the Jewels, of course, it being the collaboration between Killer Mike and ELP, Run the Jewels has become one of my favorite hip-hop acts. Their albums are phenomenal. They just seem to keep getting better and better with each release, and their ability to be prolific and also sound like they're having the time of their lives, just having fun. And this was also furthered by when I saw them live opening for Rage Against the Machine. It was just two guys having, a blast on stage. They're fantastic, but Kendrick Lamar was 100% correct. Killer Mike is a prolific rapper. He's got a vocabulary and such command of social issues that he's vicious in his attack. And Michael is no different. The album is super emotional, super vulnerable. It deals with the fact that he has been overlooked his entire career, of course, getting his start working with Outkast on Stankonia, but never quite finding his footing as a solo artist despite having some really great records in his discography. But the record deals with that idea of being overlooked. It deals with the passing of his mom and his grandmother, two people that were central in his life, even as an adult. It deals with systemic issues that affect people of color still to this day. And all of it is backed by this collision between traditional gospel and soul and modern electronic beats. It's such a unique soundscape. It's such a powerful song. And if you don't think Killer Mike is prolific, no one else could have assembled such a stacked cast of features, including most notably including Andre 3000 and Dave Chappelle. The album is fantastic, and it's unlike any other hip-hop record that anyone is making right now. It feels super vintage, super 90s, but refreshing in its use of gospel and really lush and organic arrangements. Do not sleep on Killer Mike. Last but hopefully not least, hopefully there is more to come from the remaining months of 2023. We have Evenings at the Village Gate, John Coltrane with Eric Dolphy. This is a live album, unearthed, entirely unearthed. I always get a laugh when I receive a press kit that talks about these lost albums and how they're being unearthed for the first time, never released. And I get when things are never released, but who was seriously losing the master tapes to a John Coltrane live album, right? How do you lose something like that? But I digress. Similar to Give Way by Pearl Jam, this is a really interesting record because it finds Coltrane at a transitional period. Before we get into that, let's cover some basic things that also make it a very interesting album. It is one of the only live records to feature Coltrane's collaborations with Eric Dolphy, and it takes place just months before arguably his most favorite quartet kind of forms. At this point, this is when Coltrane has signed with Impulse, and we're just like a year away from one of the greatest artistic statements ever made, A Love Supreme. So to hear Coltrane on this live album, knowing where he's heading in such a short period of time, and to hear largely a set of standards, there's only 2 original songs on this album, to hear how he approaches these these standards with such a masterful control of the instrument, his voice as a soloist, just everything about it is jaw-dropping. It's brilliant. And to say these things about Coltrane feels like it feels incredibly redundant. Like, who out here is challenging the mastery and brilliance of John Coltrane? But I don't think it can be said enough. He's absolutely one of the greatest musicians to ever perform, and any live album that uncovers new performances, new solos, because he never played the same solo twice. He never played the same song the exact same way twice. Any time that any of these things occur, it's such an exciting record. To hear him begin to employ elements of free and avant-garde jazz over these standards, knowing where he'd be in the next few years, it's truly a treasure. The mastery, the musicality, the creativity of Coltrane truly knows no bounds. His level of excellence has only been approached by few, if any. And Evenings at the Village Gate is just another example of the pinnacle of greatness that was John Coltrane. And there you have it. Those are the 10 records that have made 2023 such an exciting year for new music so far. I want to give an honorable mention to Villavint for their album Running on Empty. If you're into Hailstorm, this is a Toronto-based artist who sounds like a fresh take on that style of hard rock bordering on metal. And of course, the Foo Fighters, But Here We Are, the first post-Hawkins record, seeing the band really dig deep and take on their progressive rock influences, something that they've only ever really hinted at, most notably with their love for Rush and Dave Grohl's solo single from 2018, Play. It was a really cool record, right? And of course, we all miss Taylor Hawkins. Stay tuned for next week for a very special episode, the very first interview on Beats by Jer, featuring none other than Danny Miles, the drummer of July Talk. Follow me on TikTok and Instagram at Beats by Jer. I'm your host, Jared Harris, and this has been Beats by Jer.